Hello, Travis.
Hi, Jeff.
So recently, I was on Facebook and I saw you were you attended some various workshops, writing workshops, and it seemed like some of the stuff that the workshops you went to, you found very insightful for a number of reasons. As far as, I guess, especially you know, looking at as far as business and also I think one of the aspects too you're talking about um, about how nimble the industry is and how kind of the desktop industry we're probably a little bit more nimble than they are. And I think you also talked about another woman who worked her way into making a living. So I think you had a couple days to kind of cogitate on that, and I just kind of want to know what your thoughts were, because the little bit I read, it made me want to know more.
Yeah, so the event I went to was called Incubator. It's a writing conference, a free writing conference in Cleveland. It's put on by a nonprofit organization here called Literary Cleveland, and it basically, what it sounds like, it provides it's sort of a collaborative organization for writers, booksellers, anybody involved with pretty much print kind of products, print stories. And so this is the 8th one that they've done, and they have it at the main library in downtown Cleveland. So that it was a 2-day event in person, and then they had 2 evenings where they did uh, online seminars as
Oh,
well.
really? So that really
Yeah.
could have been anybody could have attended those.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I'm assuming those are still available online, do you know, or?
I don't know. I'd have to look on their website and see if they put up the videos. I know I got a couple emails with links to recordings of the 2 sessions that they did online. So those were on there. And there's actually people who teach storytelling and writing that are authors or former screenwriters, or that do as a side gig teaching um, writing the various sorts. So if you poke around a little bit, you can find some of those resources. And what they'll do is they'll have like a class or a workshop or something like that they charge money for. But as a teaser, they'll do like an hour-long Zoom call, and there'll be 100 people on it, and they'll talk about something for an hour. And then at the end of the call, they're like, but if I talked about all this, but if you really want to level up
Yeah.
your writing, then you got to do the 4-month intensive program for $2,000, and I'll teach you everything you need to know about writing screenplays or fiction or whatever. But this was all free, which is really cool, and it was all pretty much, with a few exceptions, local published authors. Most of them having it was a mix of people who had trade deals, who had traditional um,
Right.
contracts with Penguin or whoever, and then there were a few people that were independent, uh, where they'd self-pubbed, and there were some that had deals with small independent publishers like
But
Microcosm.
but for you, I mean, it sounds like, at least the little I know as far as reading things that you've written and things you said, it's like you're kind of approaching writing in many different aspects. You're not saying writing as publishing a book, but you're kind of, it seems to me that between your essays, I'm assuming, are you also looking at maybe uh screenplays and things like that as well, or?
Well, a thing I recognized a few years ago is that my favorite sort of storytellers, I like to call them, think of them nowadays, were were people who didn't just write novels or just write screenplays, or just, I'm sorry, not or just novels or short stories. They were people who did lots of different forms of storytelling. So if you look at somebody like Harlan Ellison, he wrote short
Yeah.
stories, he wrote novels,
He
he wrote
wrote
screenplays, he wrote
yes.
television shows,
Star
he
Trek.
wrote, yeah, he did Outer Limits.
Yeah.
He was on Babylon 5. I think he wrote some of the episodes for Babylon 5. He wrote Twilight Zone episodes. Um, he did, he just did a bunch of different stuff. Another guy that's not well known these days is named Alfred Bester. He wrote some really good science fiction books that won big awards. He also wrote television and film. Uh, you look at somebody who's kind of in the zeitgeist right now is Neil Gaiman. He started off as a journalist. His first paying gigs was as a journalist. He was a comic book writer. He's written television. He's written films. He's running a show. What else is, obviously short stories, obviously essays. He's basically written in every form in the English language that somebody's getting published and paid for. He's doing it. So a few years ago, I sort of realized that, oh, wait a minute, you don't have to just be a novelist. You don't have
Right.
to just be, and we saw that in gaming too, where you think about some of the game designers that worked for TSR, where they would do their game design gig during the daytime, and then they would do write novels as freelancers for TSR in the evenings. Um, Obviously there's Tracy Hickman, who started off at TSR writing game modules like Ravenloft and what was the other one? Phoenix? No, not Phoenix, Pharaoh. He wrote
Oh, okay.
he
Yeah.
wrote 2 or 3 modules when he came to TSR, and then ended up writing novels and switching over to writing novels. Matt Forbeck is another guy who did games
Oh,
and
yeah.
video. And so this is a thing. So I realized that, okay, well, that seems like something you could do. And then the other thing I put together with that was, you have all these industries that are now being upended by digital distribution. So there are comic book writers making independent comic books, either having printed through Kickstarters or web comics. You have novelists self-publishing novels. You have all kinds of storytelling being done by independent people. So my basic thought is to be sort of like a one-man publishing and writing, or one-man publishing company who only publishes one guy's work in different formats, because one, it's just fun to do different formats, because every format has its different things that you can do with it. You can do things in the novel that you wouldn't necessarily want to, that you can't really do in a short story. You could do
Right.
certain things in comics that you can't necessarily do. The way you tell the story impacts the kinds of stories that you tell, and the way, and the sort of narrative technique that you use.
Right. Like people complain about the movie not being like the book. Well, you can't make a movie
You
directly out of the
cannot.
book. It just will not work.
No, they're 2 different storytelling mediums. You can honor the character of you could honor the spirit and the themes of the story.
Right.
Probably one of the best ones I can think of was The Hogfather, which was a Terry Pratchett novel. They did a 2-part miniseries on Sky or something, I think, or in the UK for it, and it was fantastic. It wasn't exactly the book, but it was really close, and it nailed the themes, it nailed the motifs that Pratchett was trying to get across in that book. So it could be done. But then you have to have the people on board doing that work have to want to respect what the original
Right.
creator's work was. And that's why you're seeing novelists becoming showrunners. Like I don't know if you followed The Expanse, which was a TV
Oh yeah.
show.
Oh yeah.
That was a 10-part series of novels before it was a TV show. And the guys who wrote the novel ran the TV show because they're like, yeah, I don't want Hollywood screwing up my stuff, so I'm going to
Yeah,
make
I
it.
think my point a lot of times is there's a lot of there's a lot of like exposition you can do in books, but
Yep.
exposition will kill your show or your movie.
Yeah, and even really in novels, you don't want to do it any more than you absolutely have
Right.
to. You want to, it's a thing you want to avoid. But the big thing that you can do in a novel that you cannot do in a film, or at least it's very, very difficult to do in a film, is capturing the inner thoughts of a character,
Right.
and pacing the transformational arc of that character uh in a slower way. I mean, you have to get from, in a 2-hour film, you have to get from the protagonist believes and acts one way to the protagonist has to change and believe and act in a different way in order to overcome the obstacle that they're facing at the beginning of the film, at the instigating
Right.
incident at the beginning of the film. So you've got 100 pages of screenplay to do that, where you've got 300 pages of novel to do that. And so the pacing difference is much different. And it's just, how do you I mean, like Dune, the first Dune film that they did, where you're hearing like the voiceover of Paul
Right. Yeah.
doing talking to himself kind of stuff, or Fight Club actually did it really well, where they had these sort of B-roll montages with the character doing the voiceover and then breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience.
Yeah, there's Chuck Norris in The Octagon.
Yes. Yeah, so it's just hard to do.
I
Certain, it's
know
impossible
they
to do.
didn't do well there either.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I'll still ape that occasionally. My brother, my brother, my brother. He's out there. He's out there. He's out there. My wife just shakes her head and just keeps walking.
yeah. I mean, you look at, it's just hard to show. Those are visual mediums,
Yeah.
and you know, the benefit that the novel writer has is they have the audience helping them.
Oh yeah.
You know, because when you read the book, no matter what the writer puts on the page, the audience is still going to think something a little bit different than what the writer was thinking when they were sitting at the desk writing. So yeah, they I didn't really get to your question. Yeah, there was a bunch of so there were, I think, 4 sessions per day on Friday and Saturday, and they were kind of varied depending on what you were interested in. They usually, in each session, they would have something like, they would have a nonfiction session, a fiction session. They would have like 5 different things, breakouts going on at each, 5 or 6 different breakouts in each time slot.
Yeah.
Kind of like kind of like a game convention where you got 10 different things going on. You can pick one of them. And so just depending on what was interesting, I did several of them that were I did like 3 that were just about writing craft stuff. One was strictly about dialogue. There's a woman who is the resident writer in residence for the Cleveland libraries this year. They have a writing center, and you can just go there. They have free writing courses, and you can just show up to their writing classes, and or you can take her a couple pages of your book and she'll read them and go, no, that's crap. This is good. Keep this, get rid of that, rewrite this. And so she did an out 90 minutes on just dialogue, which was excellent. She writes cozy mysteries. She's really good. And she was also interesting in that the first 25 books she published were self-published books. And then on the strength of those books and the sales of those books, Penguin Random House came to her, and an agent came to her and said, "Hey, we want to sell your books. We want to sign you for a contract. We'll give you a big advance and do all the marketing and all that crap that you've had to do for yourself for the last 5 years or whatever it was." Because she writes fast. Because she's writing murder mysteries, and murder mysteries have a formula.
Right.
Person, the detective shows up, somebody gets killed, they look at the scene, the killer tries to cover something up or prevent the guy, there's beats that you have to hit, and once she kind of knows what those beats are, you just sort of fill in the middle, and they're 60,000 word novels maybe. And if you can write 2,000 to 3,000, you can write 2,000 to 5,000 words a day. You can write one of those in a month, like easy.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to, remember, there's a big kerfuffle in our industry, in our hobby, about, I think, the idea of the word rate that people are getting paid.
Yeah.
And some people are getting all bent out of shape. I know one gal, she writes professionally. She's like, like, mind your own business. I can put out a lot of words. I make a good living. You people don't know what you're talking about. Like, oh, we got to have X number. She's like, well, I think that's what it comes down to.
Yep.
Is, it's kind of like anything else, anything you make, if it takes you a year to write a novel, you're not going to make a living off of it. But if you can crank one of them out a month, that starts adding up.
Yeah. She can do like 3 or 4 a year. And, it's what, and if you look at the amount of words that pulp writers were producing in the 30s on a typewriter,
Yeah.
through the mail, where us now, I can crank something out on my computer, email it, have a response that afternoon as to whether they're going to accept it or not. That's a pretty big difference between, just in terms of time and how much.
Yeah. And
And
also,
those guys were generating an absurd amount, like 20, 30 short stories a year.
Yeah, but I think that's the other thing is the paperback, what was generally like 150 pages, give or take,
Yeah.
20 or 30 pages.
Well, I'm talking even before that, with the pulp zine, or
Yeah,
the pulp short stories.
I
Yeah,
think what's happened is, with the Harry Potter syndrome, now everybody's wanting 600, 800 page books, which just is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably another thing that's probably, I could see where people are more restrictive, is like,
Yep.
it takes a lot more effort to put something out than it is to put out a bunch of smaller novels.
So the SIFWA, they just changed what their acronym means. The Science Fiction Writers Association. It used to be Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. It used to be called the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. It's changed now. They've had to, the new system has caused them some hard headaches, because it used to be, and I think maybe, like, in order to join, you had to have a certain word count at 8 cents a word was what you had to get paid. And it had to fall into certain categories of stuff, and they were very precise about how they counted it. Because once you hit that mark, then you could join SIFWA, and there's benefits to doing that. Now it's a dollar amount that you make from selling your books, and
Right,
that's like,
because if you're
and that's like, I've got a
self-publishing,
crate of them in my trunk, and I sold them at a science fiction con, and and they do it by the honor system too, because they're like, how do we?
right, it's a different economy where people are selling on Amazon.
Right. So I guess, at least for that particular, for that one session that I went to, the big takeaway from it was, there is now almost a lot of the writers who had traditional publication deals that I interacted with also said they were hybrid, where they were publishing some of their own stuff. They were publishing stuff with small, tiny imprints, basically the equivalent of something like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or
Yeah.
or one of these other small companies like we have around here these days, where it's like, yeah, they're publishing a little bit of everybody's stuff. And they might have a 2-book deal with one of the big 5.
Well, it seems to me that that's also pretty um applicable to if people are wanting to break into writing for RPGs. Like,
I think that is
because you
the
can
case.
start publishing your own stuff, and then you can show it to people. Some people may like it, and then they may say, "Hey, I'll give you a little bit of work here." And then, it does add up, because there's a number of people I've noticed over, well, even people who do podcasting have, like James Intercasso in the D&D world, and James Holloway is another one where they've had podcasting, and they start doing a little bit of writing, and they do a little bit more writing, and then they actually start becoming, start gaining popularity. It may not be huge, but I mean, I think that's the thing, is where people may get frustrated not knowing, but I think being able to see that there is a path. But the problem is, you got to be consistent.
Yes.
You can't just say, okay, I wrote my book, now where are all the legions coming to buy my book, and people wanting to sign me up?
Right. And it's not just consistent, but it's also you have to build a body of work over time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like you can't just do a little bit. You have to produce dependably. I think, because if you're just doing it once so often, if it's too long before publications, people are going to forget about you. But I think you're able to produce something and being in front of people consistently, I think that helps generate a little bit of momentum.
It absolutely does. And in the fiction world, it has become a situation where, and this is a reason why I decided I would probably never try to seek out a traditional pub contract, because nowadays basically the publishing houses don't do a whole lot of marketing for you. They don't do a lot of PR work for you. They don't push book events for you. You have to pay an agent or a manager to do that stuff, or you have to do it yourself. And it's hard to get an agent unless you already have a website with a blog and an established email list. Like, if you don't have, if you're a fiction writer without 2,000 names on an email list, they don't even want to, the agents don't even want to talk to you.
Well, but you think about that too. It's like, I remember somebody was saying that they were looking at having somebody do a video for their cameras for the Kickstarter, or it was for something they wanted a video done, and they had 2 people, both were equal, but one of them had a huge Instagram following.
Yep.
So he's like, well, of course I'm going to hire the Instagram person, because they're going to bring value by sending at least some other people my way. It may not be
Right.
everybody, but it's like, so I think the same kind of thing. It's like, if you don't have anything, you're a risk, as people, as we would say, pig in a poke. Have you ever heard that term?
Yes. Well, my people are from West Virginia, so I know. I'm very, very well.
Yeah. So you're just a pig in a poke. You don't know. You're a
Right.
pig in a bag. Nobody knows you can't even see it. So the
Right.
idea is, and the same thing, like, it's kind of like, even like with, say with Gary's appendix, not that it's large enough, but it's like, some people already have an established audience, and there's value in having somebody write, because they will bring some of that over.
Yep. Well, especially if you're aligning if you're in this, if you're aligning the audiences, if you
Yeah.
have, if you're part of the same audience, or there's some overlap of audience. Because another thing, you do have to be careful about the social media people. Some, just because somebody has 10,000
Right.
Instagram followers doesn't mean any of those people are
Right.
gonna be are gonna be interested in you. Because like, I have a pretty a small but growing newsletter, email newsletter list. But my email open rate is 60% with a 20% click through. And your email marketers will tell you like a 20% open rate is freaking great.
Right.
And I'm killing that by 3x. So I have very good engagement with my audience. My audience cares about what I send them every month enough to open the email and then read the email. And then if there's an essay in there, which I usually throw something in there for everybody, they're clicking through and reading that. So I'm grabbing somebody's attention for at least 45 minutes every month.
Right. Because you could pay Madonna $1 million to publicize your newsletter, and
Right.
you might get 1 million people for the very first one to open it, and then they'll never see another one ever open that again, other than their
Correct.
previous followers.
Yes. So the social media follower count is not, it's not nothing,
Right.
but it is, but it is a metric that you have to have in context with other metrics, like open rates and click-through rates, and
Right.
and does that person convert into a customer at the bottom of the funnel, or are they just sort of in the top of the funnel?
Yeah, and that is true, and it's kind of like even interesting with I mentioned before. It's like even with YouTube and with the Anchor, it's like it's it's kind of a little bit of a tangent, but definitely like the Anchor people, at least the audio, I think are much more consistent and that's what I'm looking for. Like there's a certain group of people there's a large group of people that will listen to it the very first day it drops. And then,
Mhm.
you know, but then when I go to YouTube, it's all over the map. It's like that
Right.
audience I'm not going to say there are some people who are pretty dedicated to listening to it, but it's a very small amount that's dedicated to listening to that. So, right, even your social media it can vary. Somebody could have a lot of, you know, people on YouTube, but those may not be that people that engaged.
Right. Well, and YouTube is a weird critter too, because there is a bunch of stuff that you can do to improve your YouTube channel that doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense until you start digging into it. Just changing your thumbnail can change everything. Changing the title of your thing can change your view count by exponential. It's insane how much of a difference um just changing titles and thumbnail will blow up a video that had been a dog before.
Well, I do know myself, like I'll go through YouTube and what will catch my interest are there's a guy who is a street musician and he'll say, you know, you know, see this person's reaction when they, you know, after they ask to hear, you know, da da da, or this person, you know, stranger just killed
Right.
it. And I find myself like, I'll click those, even though I know they're the clickiest, clickbaity.
Yep.
They're still good, but still, it's like
Yep.
I'm ignoring all the other stuff. But for
Yeah.
some reason, these all caps, and I like
Yep.
it's like you're right. There is a science behind it.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I mean, it's definitely a thing where you can do. It's a really interesting platform. I've been working on it lately, and it's I actually am convinced that if you want to build an engaged audience, or really a community, that's probably the best place to be.
That's the one I've put my least amount of energy.
And I have too, until like the last month or so. I've kind of avoided it. And I'm like, nah, I need to, because just posting 3 videos has caused me to go, oh, I see how I see what these other people were talking about now. I really got to be serious about this.
Yeah, because it can be pretty significant. Because I've noticed is like there's certain people, the numbers will definitely crank up. Like there,
Yep.
it definitely, and it could also be other things too. It could be my title, could be the subject matter. But yeah, there can be some tremendous amount of engagement with that.
Yep. Yep. For sure. So what were the other things I did? So there was just craft classes. There was a dialogue class. There was a class. There was a writer who writes mysteries, like crime mysteries.
So I guess the question is, no, and I don't know, do you write adventures?
I'm working on right now. I have a project that I'm getting close to finishing, and it is what I call it, a campaign seed.
Yeah.
And what it is, it's a setting, but it's only a fairly small area around. It's this one town, uh, some small factions within that town, the major NPCs there, and then some other powerful forces that are sort of causing problems for that town.
Yeah.
That are not that are in the region around the town. So it's basically the reason I call it a campaign seed, because it's a bunch of NPCs who are in conflict with one another, locations where adventure could happen, and then you drop it on a map, and it's a bottom up. It's basically everything you would need to do a bottom up campaign without the stuff outside of the small region. Right. So if it's basically a DM could take this, read it, print out the reference sheets for it, and then introduce their players into there as it's a sandbox is what it is. It's a campaign. It's a small little sandbox for you to start players in a campaign. And then once you sort of get, well, they're really interested in this thing that's going on, I'll develop that more. Right.
So
that's really how I run my campaigns now.
But I guess the question is, so you're going and they're talking about writing mysteries.
Yes.
And you write adventures.
Yes.
So I'm assuming since you're writing different things, you're analyzing probably what you're hearing through several different filters at the same time.
Yes. So I do have an interest in writing fiction. So I'm gonna, when I finish this project, I'm gonna do some fiction and then do some other game stuff, and it's gonna be a sort of mix and mash back and forth. There are some principles that you can take from storytelling and apply them to gaming. And then there's certain things in gaming that just don't translate over. Because especially if you have my viewpoint about it, where I am very adamantly and outspokenly a person who says that tabletop role-playing games are story creation, not storytelling.
Yeah.
However, there's a caveat. You do get to tell stories through a game, but the story that you're telling is the context that leads up to the point that the players are dropped into the situation, right? So you're telling the story of the dungeon up to the point that the players arrive there.
You're writing the prologue's written.
Right. Correct.
But I guess the question I'm saying is, so when you're going to these, and I know some things don't necessarily translate well, but I guess the question is, you're going to these writing workshops from a person, say, who's writing for not traditional fantasy or nonfiction, but just writing for usage at the table for games. How useful do you find they're talking about of dialogue and about mysteries and these various seminars. How useful do you find it for if you're just strictly looking through the prism of writing for desktop RPGs?
It really varies. I would say and I would say a lot of it is not particularly useful.
Okay.
Um, the pieces that I would say that are useful are understanding um, character and characterization, understanding theme and motif, and those are two different things, and people get those mixed up all the time. Understanding how to, because like you can insert theme into a setting, into a role-playing game. You do that by your villains
Yes.
or some of the other NPCs in the, but you do that by your villains, because in fiction, the way theme works is your protagonist is sort of carrying the theme. So in Conan stories that Robert Howard wrote, he's basically saying that civilization is weak and soft, and barbarism is the natural state of humanity, and that's what we're always going to revert back to. And barbarism is more honest and more, at least appealing in a certain sense.
Yeah.
So he carries that. It's like you put that theme on a card, and he kind of carries it around through the story, embodying it. And but Howard never. A few times he tells you that in the dialogue, where Conan says, "I don't get you civilized dogs always telling lies and claiming to be, something something." Occasionally Conan says it, but usually it's Howard showing you that Conan is superior in these three ways. So he's carrying the theme along. But the anti-theme is the sorcerer or the corrupt priest or the ambitious general who's backstabbing his king or whatever. The sorcerer is the opposite, is the flip side of that theme. So you can do that in your games. I do that in my games all the time. I've had villains who were probably the theme of not my current campaign, but the previous campaign was from a line by a poet. The world as it really is not good against evil, but bad against worse. And so all of my NPCs that were in positions of power were all bad, and some of them were worse. And in order to defeat them, the players would have to ally themselves with somebody who was bad in order to defeat somebody who was worse, or they would have to behave in ways that were worse or bad in order to defeat the other guy. Right.
Right.
So like, oh, this guy is doing terrible, awful things. And if we play fair, if we do the good guy thing, we're all going to die. It's just how it's going to go. We can see it. It's obvious. It's apparent. Our tactical situation or strategic situation is we have to go and do awful, terrible things in order to defeat somebody who's doing even worse things.
Well, it's interesting because we're watching, my wife and I, we're slowly going through the Blacklist. Have you ever seen that? But basically, the world's most wanted man, Raymond Reddington, turns himself into the FBI.
Okay.
And so basically, he's got a list of like the worst of the worst, and so he gets the FBI to go after these people, but he's also gaining, and you're not sure exactly how he's gaining by that.
Right.
So it's kind of like,
yeah.
It's that whole idea where they're having the good guys are having to make these morally questionable decisions
right
all the time, but
yeah.
they're allying themselves with somebody who's bad, but to drive against people who are worse.
Or another good film like that would be Training Day, where the Ethan Hawke's character is this ambitious young guy who wants to be part of this anti-narcotics squad, but then finds out that, oh, these guys are all dirty and they're corrupt and they're using drugs. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty common theme. And so that's one of the things about these classes that you can take is, there are these situations where once you start to, there are patterns in story, right? So, and once you start to understand the patterns of how these things work, and you understand the conflict and how conflict works in a story and how dilemma works in a story, you can start creating adventures and settings and situations that have the same, because you're basically doing act one of a book. You're doing the setup. When you create an adventure, you're creating the situation.
Right.
Like, here's the situation. And then when you're the storyteller, you get to decide what the characters are going to do. But if you're playing role-playing game, that's the point where you hand it off to the players and they go, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. And then the combination of the game system and what you, as a game master, what you know about the world, the setting, and how it would logically respond to the actions of the players, that narrative emerges out of that bit of story you created, the gameplay, and then the outcomes from the gameplay mediated by logic, common sense, and the rules. So then at the end, a story emerges out of that, but not in the middle of it, which is what 90% of the awful game mastering advice that you see everywhere on the internet, people talking about, well, you got to tell your story. No, that's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. That is then a interactive narrative, like a Zork book, or do you pick path A, path B, or path C, and they all end up in the same place anyway. It's not a game, that's a puzzle.
Right. And I think the idea is, and I think ultimately, I mean, what's I think as a GM, I want to be surprised.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where the best of the games is, the ones where everybody at the table surprised.
Yep. And if you've mapped out what that path is going to be through the game, then you're not surprised.
You're not surprised. No,
you can't be surprised.
You got to allow that element of like, I don't know. And I think that's, again, I mentioned before in Vice, but I think, when you have an adventure path, that's where I think those problems can occur.
Yep, absolutely.
And
because they're all plotted events, they're interactive narratives, they're not games.
Yeah, and I think probably the best campaign series I've ever ran was a hack of Blades in the Dark, and it's just because everything was made up, but it was always made up after whatever the result was of the previous heist.
Right.
It's like, well, I don't know. So a lot of times I wouldn't even know what I was going to do. I just would say, I need to get these people to the scene. I have the scene in the mind, but I don't know what that will happen. They need to be, or whatever the scenario situation is. And after that, it's like, I don't know. It's really not to me to decide how this turns out.
Right. And you do have certain game formats that are a little bit more trickier than, say, a sandbox game, like an investigation, like in Call of Cthulhu, or a murder mystery game, where you have some known things. You have a body, It's not a murder mystery unless there's a murder.
Right.
It's somebody murdered that person. There are clues to the murder that the players are supposed to find, and then put together that mystery, and then the question at the end is, will they find the killer? Will they catch the killer and bring them to justice? Those are kind of the three questions that you get out of a mystery, an investigation. And my feeling is from that, this is what the killer did, that moment of the murder forward should be a little bit vague. You should know, okay, if they start to get close, the murderer is going to respond in some way. That's a reasonable thing to sort of plot out. You're going, oh, they've gotten close. Oh, a guy comes through the door with a gun.
Right.
Right. But that's a triggered event that doesn't necessarily happen. Right. And that's, I think, acceptable, because that's like, oh, I decided to take this path through the dungeon because there was bloody footprints that went through there. For whatever reason, I decided to go that way
Right.
because there was a clue for me to follow, not because I flipped the coin and said 1, 2, 3. There's actually a reason that the player agency was preserved. And just because you can draw it in a linear path, finds the clues, figures out who the murderer is, catches murderer, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come to those points in A to B. They might go A to F to G.
Yeah.
And the game master has to kind of let that happen. And that's
to,
hard to do.
One thing I thought about doing is you could always just say, these are all the things are bits of information, and list all the information. And then whatever the players do and how they approach it, then you determine how you dole out that information.
Yeah.
That's hard. It takes a lot of
yeah.
Maybe breaking into a house, they'd have seen a picture of these two people together, but maybe
if I understand it correctly, that is the way the gumshoe system works.
What the gumshoe system does is it generally makes it super easy to find clues.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily, the clues are there, and you generally have an easy time finding clues. But the hard part is, because their premise is that finding clues is the least interesting thing. But figuring out what those clues mean, that's what's interesting. Like, having to figure out where this, because it's like, even we're playing Call of Cthulhu now with my son, his friend, and a friend of mine, and it's just like, it's kind of weird. It's very easy to miss stuff. You start missing rolls.
Oh yeah,
they do a pretty good job, but that's where the Call of Cthulhu can mess up, is you don't find the necessary clues, and that's not very satisfying.
Yep. Yeah. Well, they put keys behind dice rolls, which is, I think, and not behind player decisions.
And I think what they've done recently, I mean, we've been playing, is they seem to provide enough clue. There's so many clues that you're still going to be likely finding stuff.
Right.
And so that's kind of, I think, how they're solving. But I think the problem I'm finding with these is I can pretty much figure out what the deal is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, who needs a 45
mm-hmm.
between the eyes. It's just like, but there's Brindlewood Bay. Have you ever played Brindlewood Bay?
No, I've heard about it. I haven't played it.
It's basically, have you ever played any of the Powered by the Apocalypse games?
A long time ago.
So it's so you base the players roll for degrees of, it's either failure, partial success, or full success. it's very fun, but the thing is the killer has not been determined. It's like
Oh,
Schrodinger's cat. You have all these suspects, they do
right,
all the inspection, and once they find so many clues, then they make their guess. And then
right.
they roll, and the roll will determine whether they're right or not. And then if they not, it keeps going.
Yeah, I don't know. I would like that.
I thought it wouldn't work, but the players were fine with it.
Right.
But the people I played with, for the most part, never played RPGs before. But
Oh,
one person
yeah,
really loved it. The problem is that you have all these clues that are just they're meaningless clues.
yeah,
But then they put these clues together, and then it's all of a sudden it creates its own sense, but it creates its own set of mystery. So now
right,
you've done this, and you're like, well, why was this cod in these boxes, ice cod, being sent to this house, and and it leads people wanting to explore things that you just were just making up on the fly. They had nothing to do with
right,
anything,
right.
and
Well, and
and
that tells you about games and stories. It
yeah,
really does, because like people, human beings are pattern recognition and story
yes, yes,
generation
yes, yes,
simulators, right?
yes. Oh yeah,
Because we will take, like you're saying, four randomly generated things and create a narrative in our brain about how did these four things connected? How did this you, well, there's the box of toothpaste in that other place that we found. And you're like, toothpaste,
and that
fish.
other guy was using the same toothpaste.
Right. Yeah.
Which is odd, 'cause that toothpaste is sold nowhere else in the United States but this one town in Vermont, so they must have been in Vermont at that same time.
Right.
It's just like
They were in the same hotel. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
We just did it right here. Right. We just invented a narrative
Yeah.
about toothpaste and fish that we just pulled out of the ether.
Yeah.
And so, which is actually, and it was actually a somewhat plausible connection,
Yes.
right? Oh, these two guys that stayed in the same bed and breakfast,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this weird old lady buys this strange toothpaste that's
Yeah.
only sold in Europe because when
Yeah.
she was on her vacation in Europe,
Yeah.
really liked it, right? So you can see how story can be generated through play, which is what always drives me nuts about the I'm telling my story types of GMs. Like, you're working to just out of pure laziness
Mm.
as a GM, you could spend an hour just generating stuff.
Yeah, because the stuff that was provided, the list of clues, they provided it for the scenario, they provide a list of clues.
Right,
But the clues are nothing more than just items. They don't
right.
mean anything.
They're objects.
Yeah,
They're objects without context.
yeah, and then the players create the context, or you might put it into
Right.
context, and the players will try and derive a meaning out of it.
Right. So that, I mean, that would be what I would consider a story generation engine. Really,
Yeah.
is so what the players are doing is they're generating story that did not previously exist. Where I would say what the OSR is kind of doing is they're creating more of the story and then generating the
Right.
rest of it.
Now, the problem with Brentwood Bay is you created all these interesting hooks that led people to this,
Right.
but there's nothing in the game that allows you to explore those hooks after you've finished the session.
Right. Right.
The
It's a
mechanics aren't there.
one and done kind of
Yeah, and you
thing.
could do the next one because it's basically the premise is I think it was Murder She Wrote. So these
Uh-huh.
old women, murder book club, they solve mysteries,
Right.
and it's like a new episode
Right.
every week.
Yeah. So it's a cozy mystery kind of story
Yes,
generator. Right. And they're probably episodic, sort of one not connected to the other.
completely
They're
episodic.
not,
Yes,
yeah, and they're not persistent. And
no,
that's, and if you're into that sort of thing, some people are, some people that would not amuse my game group more than one or two sessions.
no.
And
I
they
think
would go, yeah, well, this is kind of okay.
you could, I think, if you wanted to try and make some sort of connection, it wouldn't be that hard. But yeah, it definitely did what it did pretty well, but the problem is it was a tremendous amount of cognitive load on me trying to interpret things and wrangle things this whole time.
Right. Well, and the other thing that I personally dislike about a lot of the powered by apocalypse and games like that is, in my experience, most of the time somebody, when you give a group of 6 people narrative control, invariably somebody plays a wrong note, and you're like, suddenly, why is there a stunning mallet in the pantry? I mean, it's like somebody throws something weird that is dissonant
Right.
into the game, and I always and it's just, probably it's just me or just my preference, but I have a hard time, like, it screws me up because then
Yes, it
I
does.
can't.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? I'm we've moved on, and I'm still back here going, wait, what? Why?
But that's the same thing. But that's true with any game. You're like, say you're playing a serious mystery game, and everybody's naming their characters, and my character's name is Colonel Sanders. You're like, well, wait a minute, like,
Yeah,
or my name's Ronald McDonald. It's like, it's hard. It kind of breaks, and that is kind of, you're
yeah,
right. So whenever you have, that's the problem. More people you have, the harder it can be to keep the theme of the game or the tone of the game from going, you know, if you're wanting a game to meet certain criteria, it's very difficult with more
right.
people that you have.
Yeah, when you have a game where the players have more narrative control over the setting and what's going on outside of their own individual characters, uh, that removes a constraint which your more traditional style of game has.
Well, it's like, it's interesting. One that does that in a way that they, I think, doesn't have to break it, but I think isn't fantasies. One of them there is, you name a truth about your character,
Mm-hmm.
and that truth is the truth. It's like, or it's an item,
Right.
but it could be anything. It's like, the cloak I wear is from a god who died 10 millennia ago, and such, and that is a truth that is unalterable. But I don't think it necessarily has mechanical effects in the game, but it
Right.
definitely, but it does give the opportunity for somebody just to just like be stupid and yeah, and ruin it for, that you're trying to create a certain tone, and all of a sudden, yeah, it's a Happy Meal, and I got a toy whistle in there, and some
Yeah.
stickers, and some fake tattoos, and it's like, no, no.
Yeah. Well, and if it's, some of these games, and a lot of those games are designed to be run a certain way.
Yeah.
And if you divert from that, you're like, you go, no, we're going to do a house rule and we're going to change it. Totally changes the game. And so you can't do a house rule. You have to basically run it the way
Oh,
they
right.
designed it.
Well, you're right, but I think you're right, and I think the thing is, it's like it. But going back to, I know this is going to be really jumping the rails, like Monopoly.
Yep.
I hate that game. I hate that game. But then somebody pointed out, I was reading, that one of the worst things you can do is throw money into free parking.
Yes.
And it's like, well, if you don't do that, and you also make sure that people, when you land on a property and it's not been purchased, that it goes up for sale, that anybody can bid on it. Those two items alone will make that's the way the game is intended to be ran. But you take those out, the game goes on forever.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and it becomes a lot more. I mean, it's already a pretty random game to begin with.
Right. Because you're right. It is, because especially if everybody plays it like they should, you should be buying up all the properties, mortgaging yourself to the hilt if you need to, in order to just be able to just suppress the other people with having to pay money all the time. But yeah,
Right.
you're right. You can only really buy the properties either you land on or that comes available for sale. I think probably the only strategy is if you know your other people, if you know somebody's not going to be buying properties, that then you will. And that, I guess, there's the wheeling and dealing too.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's if people just don't really wheel and deal, it's just pretty random. It's shoots and ladders.
Yeah. Pretty close to it.
But I think too, it's interesting is, but there's similar things I think even with even other games like, we do. It's kind of like people. The hot topic is the the fumbles and the crits.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
I've kind of not paid I paid as little attention to 1D&D as I absolutely can.
well, what's interesting is what they're saying is, monsters cannot crit, but player characters can. And people are kind of like freaking out. But then I've been listening to OSR people. There's a couple people, and they've been is not related to this. They're saying having a crit is on a 20 is just is bad because there's more opportunities for criticals against players than there is against monsters. Because
That's true.
yeah,
Because if you especially if you have, say, 10 goblins attacking 3 adventurers,
yeah,
right? And say you have a group of 3rd or 4th level adventurers could take on a dozen goblins, no problem. Maybe they'll get a few bad dice rolls in there, but probably, especially if you have a wizard in the bunch, they're going to take care of a dozen goblins in 4 or 5 rounds. But if you have 12 dice rolls, every other round you're going to have a crit mathematically.
yeah,
Because you have 12 attack rolls for the goblins. Every 20 dice rolls, there's going to be 1 crit mathematically, because it's even distribution. So every 2 rounds, there's going to be a crit on a player character. Well, if if that fight goes 4 rounds, that's going to be 2 crits. And if it's on the same character, well, maybe that character dies.
yeah.
And if it's on 2 characters, that's going to be bad, or at least not good. It's going to have a significant impact on the fight. So I don't use crits, or I don't do auto crits or auto fail with 20 in my house rules.
But it just goes to show that it's easy to kind of like make a little tweak and think it's fun, but you can drastically alter the game.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you look at the crit tables in DCC or Hackmaster, where you've got crazy stuff that can happen, and especially DCC, where you get a character in the higher levels, or monsters that are higher levels, where their crit range increases, where it's not just a 20, it's 20 to 25 or whatever it is, and they're rolling on a D24, plus they get pluses and everything else. You get these crazy, you can have insane fights with 3 and 4 crits back and forth very quickly.
Yeah, but I think that's the intent of the game. So that's baked in the mechanics to be that way.
It is.
Yeah,
for sure.
But I think it's just it's very easy. I mean, I think the thing is all the way from the very beginnings, we of the hobby, we were house ruling.
Yes. Well, basically that's what the hobby was. It was house ruled. It was
Gary's rules. We're playing with Gary's rules.
It was house ruled. It was a series of experiments where they said, well, what if we took this thing from this game and this thing from this other game, put it together, and oh yeah, we really like Harvey or Roger Corman movies, and we'll throw that in there. And I sometimes say that Dave Arneson discovered tabletop role-playing games. He didn't invent them. The guys in they're like, they just picked up the right rock, and there it was. It was like, yeah, but they just tried the right combination of techniques and play style and said, "Oh, this is cool. Let's follow this thread."
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I mean, obviously we all role played when we were younger.
Yeah.
And there's a set of rules, I mean, that we followed. I don't know how we decided who was actually shot and who the bullets missed, but we would somehow come up with some sort of like figuring out, oh, I guess I'm hit and I'm going down. Well, I guess I'm wounded in the leg and I'm not dead. It's
Yep.
like
Yep.
so we grew beyond that, but I'm trying to think if there was other things. I think probably the closest thing would be probably would have just been like, but stand-up comedy is probably the only other thing that's kind of spontaneous. I don't know there's really anything as adults that we do that would be spontaneous as far as generating um like gameplay, but I don't think there is.
Improv theater,
Yeah.
improv, sort of improv sketch kind of stuff. Um, and doing sort of story prompts and that sort of thing as well can sometimes have that same sort of game-like characteristic if you're doing a group story prompt sometimes, because we did some stuff. Because one of the things that some of the like the Forge narrative first kind of games remind me of is the activities that we would do sometimes in some of my creative writing classes in college. They would there would be a somebody would start with a writing prompt, and then the first person would say something, and then the next person would add on to that, and the next person would add on to that, and you had to retain everything that came before you, but you could do pretty much whatever you wanted with what, and when you added on your piece. And there's a bunch of different sort of activities like that that you can do, that are very similar.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So I guess the question is, you probably want for those types of things, and I guess this is probably the same thing for games, and maybe even for maybe writing in general. It's like you want a consistent flow, but then you're going to definitely want some twists. You can't have twists all the time, otherwise you wind up with the TV series Heroes. But you and nobody wants that. Like, he's a hero, he's a bad guy, he's a villain, he's a good guy, he's a villain, he's a good guy. It's like, just stop. And I think that's probably even true. I mean, now I think about that, probably for adventure design and things like that, the idea is probably makes a good idea to even have some sort of twist somewhere in there, because that's pretty much common with most even TV shows and movies.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something surprising that occurs,
Yeah,
and that can be difficult to create.
yeah. I guess even Star Wars, find out Darth Vader's his father.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if you we've kind of gone all over the place. I don't know if you have any other questions about the workshop.
Was there anything out, because you said there's some, I think one of the things you mentioned was flexibility, and you said that you felt that the small press, at least as far as the I don't know if you said specifically, but that you think, if I recall correctly, that the role-playing game, we'll call it press, is a lot more nimble in a way that adapts.
What I noticed was there seemed to be less awareness of the print on demand options. Um,
Are you saying that because of because what people are stating from the workshop, or are you saying just from your conversations with people?
both. Like there seemed to be a limited awareness about, it seemed like the focus was everybody was trying to trying to stay inside the traditional publishing model as much as they possibly could. And it seemed like, and maybe it was just this conference, because it is an awful lot of it was focused on literary fiction and memoir, and not sort of I guess the NPR crowd, the sort of people who read the New Yorker and the
Yeah.
Atlantic Monthly, was sort of that there was some genre fiction people there for sure, like the murder mystery lady and the um the crime writer I visited with, and I would say most of the stuff was memoir, narrative nonfiction, literary fiction, and that crowd very much is trying to stay inside of the traditional publishing model of there is a writer, there is a publisher with their editors, and all and they didn't seem, there was almost no talk about self-publishing. It was acknowledged. It was like, yeah, this is a thing. It's real. It's serious. And then, the book, there was one of the sessions I went to was with some independent bookstore owners, and they're very much aware of self-publishing and how that's in small press publishing and how that's kind of changed the business, because they work with a lot of self-published and small press people. So they're a lot more aware. The people selling books out of hand seem to be a lot more with it than some of the writers and some of the other.
Well, it takes I mean, there's a couple ways of doing that. I mean, one is just the technical aspect if you're doing it yourself.
Right.
It's not easy, but
No.
then you can also pay somebody to design your cover
Yep.
and upload your files, and that's not cheap. So I
No.
think there's an upfront costs that maybe
Right.
those people aren't wanting to pay.
Right. Well, and if you're doing, so there is a weird, and it's weird to me because it seems like the people in some of these genres who it seems like the majority of the books in certain genres are self-published now. Like in terms of like just total numbers, there's more romance, fantasy, and certain like murder genre, that sort of stuff. I would say if you said here's 100% of the books in the genre being published today, the traditional pub is like this, and the bulk of it is really self-pub, because the traditional publishers in the genres are not spending the money, they're not developing authors, they're not doing marketing, and they won't talk to you unless you've already built your own audience.
Yeah.
They don't want, so you almost, it's getting to the point, I think, in order to get a real book deal where you can actually make real money, you have to develop as a career as a self-published writer with a good audience who has the potential to be a superstar.
But what's
Right?
interesting is the superstars are actually trying to venture out.
Yeah.
And so now
Sanderson.
you're really, yeah. So now
Brandon
you're in the
Sanderson.
situation where it's like you gotta be successful enough for them to capture you. But if you're too successful, those people will leave them too. Or potentially, I mean, in the future.
Yeah. Well, because Brandon Sanderson has like 30 people working for him, doing whatever bunches of different, whatever tasks he needs them to do to move his books along. But there are people, I'm on a Facebook group called Wide for the Win, where it's all self-published authors who are selling books in a bunch of different online formats.
Yeah.
Or online locations across the world, and they're making, it's fascinating to me that there are people I've known people with traditional publishing contracts who make less money than self-pub writers and have to have day jobs. Like they've got a contract with Penguin or St. Martin's or whoever, and they have a day job because they can't make enough of a living off of their book sales, when all they should have to do is just write, and then their publisher should do their agent, their publisher's taking care of the rest of it. But then there are self-published authors working in the exact same genre, doing their own marketing, hiring their own editors, hiring out their cover artists, doing all the stuff that the big four or big five used to do, and making more money than traditional publication.
Yeah, and I think if you look at too, it's like I even look at Kickstarters, and if you look at it, as a person who's produced material and then Kickstarters, I look at other people's Kickstarters and I kind of try and evaluate like how well did they actually do when it's all said and done, and there are people who have ran some Kickstarters that didn't look like it did overly great, but when I look at it, it's like actually margin wise, they did pretty good.
Yeah.
And I was like, if they could do that 4 or 5 times a year, they're actually making really good money.
Yeah, it's
And
like
you
the
could,
guy with the hot dog stand.
yeah,
You're like, he's got 50 cents in that dog, but he sold it for $2.
yeah, exactly. He's selling a bunch of hot dogs. But then you look at some of these others, it's like, wow, it looks like they got like, 50,000 or 30,000. And you're looking at exactly what they're printing, large books, lots of art. And you're like, so where I think, probably the same thing with the publishing with there, it's like it, and even going, we were talking earlier, people weren't listening. It's even like with movies, like there's a guy who figured out a formula. It's like, he'll make these like $5 million movies, all day long, whatever. I can't remember what the amount was, and it couldn't go over. And he made lots of money on
Right.
those, lots of money, but he would make a lot of them and they were low budget and it just wasn't attractive to the bigger studios. But I think there is opportunities, and because when you were talking about, so you were talking about being nimble. I almost
Right.
said nimble. Maybe you did.
I think adapting
Adapting.
adopting. The thing that I really saw was there was no in the business sessions, and I only went to a couple. There was no conversation about Kickstarter at all. Period. Nobody ever talked about it. Nobody mentioned it. There was very little conversation about self-pub, and it was kind of almost like it wasn't suggest. It was like, yeah, you can do it, and yeah, you can make a living at it. And I don't know whether that was like a cultural snobbery thing, where it's like, oh yes, we're all writers and we have our fancy contracts with, St. Martin's Press and Random House, or if it was just simply an ignorance. It didn't seem like there was a lot of awareness of all the possibilities of direct to consumer among writers, and like the ways that you could get around even Amazon or the big publishing systems, where it seems like in the independent RPG community, they figured it out. Like there are people making a living at it.
Kevin Crawford.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bonnie Cook.
Right. Maybe they're not killing it, but they're maybe they're not buying a second house in Florida, but
yeah,
you can, if you're like working a day job as a guy in a warehouse like I was doing, or if you're making, unless you're doing something pretty technical or very skill oriented these days, you can make a lot more money working for yourself, self-publishing your own work or freelancing, than you can doing a paid salary job.
I think there's opportunities, and that's, and I've, whatever I do the math, but I do think there is opportunities. And the other thing I was thinking about too, it's like, I don't see really many people doing it with RPGs, but I'm really tempted to see if there's a market for tying fiction in with Kickstarters.
There is. Brandon Sanderson. Now he's a big name.
No, I mean with RPG Kickstarters.
Oh. So like doing a RPG, like a game, and then having a novel or a collection of anthology or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm gonna,
Go with it
yeah.
as a
So
part
like,
of a bundle.
yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be a part, might be an add-on, but
Right.
that's another thing. It's like, well, that's something I was thinking about. Like, well, if I, for like the writing rates I mean, the writing rates are the writing rates. So whether it's for RPGs or for novels, and
Yep.
it's just like that's the other thing I was thinking about. Like, well, if I'm doing a post-apocalyptic, thing, you know, what about doing a series of stories or a novella involving whatever that setting is?
Yep.
I'm wondering. I'm not really seeing that really being. Of course, there's probably many reasons. The only thing one of the things I can think of is, if something were to be done, for most people, it's probably not a lot of like margins. Like, like Monty Cook, most people are going to be buying the core books.
Yep.
Does it pay for him to, divest resource or invest his resources for that rate of return? But I was just thinking, but for a small publisher, that's something that could be dabbled in, and that might be an opportunity.
That is my long-term plan, is to build a campaign setting or a game around a campaign setting. I haven't quite decided yet, but the basic general notion is to build a campaign setting, a story world in fiction in the what's called a story world in certain businesses, film and books. They use the term story world a lot. Design a story world, have an RPG product set in that story world, and then tell stories in that world in different formats: books, short stories, independent comics. I might even do some, if I can scrape up the cash to do it, maybe even a video game at some point. But that's the long-term goal of what I'm doing with my thing.
So what I'm thinking is, because I think you're thinking about having and developing a overarching IP, and then spinning different things off with the IP, right?
Yes. The technical term is called transmedia,
Okay.
which is basically you have a big story that you chop up into little pieces and you tell different parts of the big story through the different pieces depending on.
So what I'm thinking is actually the opposite.
Okay.
What I'm thinking about
There's
is
there's a lot of different ways to do it.
well, just because it comes to my addled brain at 4 o'clock in the afternoon after spending a day putting dumpster fires out at work, it doesn't mean it's legit. But I was thinking, and actually talking to Adam about his ideas, that is maybe develop the world through small projects.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I guess not much different than we were talking about with your you talk about starting, like sometimes starting small, don't worry about your map at first
Right.
and develop out. But I started thinking, it's like one was that I would do, the thought was, it's thought with Adam Kovac, was a science fiction setting and doing like a story to go with it. But then he's like, well, he kind of talked about a lot of times, if you are you want to have stuff developed to give to your writers. But then I started thinking, well, but you could also do kind of like, I guess what they did with Frog God, is they just paid writers to write stuff, and then they built up the lore. I don't want to be that haphazard, but
Right.
necessarily, but it's like, well,
there's been things like that done before. so if you look at Thieves World, there, which the first couple books in that series are fantastic, and there was a role playing game made out of that. Thieves World was, they sort of they created a city
Yeah.
with some stuff going on in it, and then each, and then they would assign a story to each writer.
Yeah.
And they had, I don't remember all the rules about it, but they had a set of rules, and they said you can't kill another guy's character unless they say it's okay, and you have to follow within these guidelines. But each writer sort of added to the story of the Thieves World.
Right.
uh George Martin, before he became famous for Song of Ice and Fire, had a thing called Wild Cards,
Yeah.
that he did with Roger Zelazny and some other people, that actually came, I think, out of like a GURPS Supers game. Um, I
Yeah.
remember the lore of that a little bit better. And that was another similar sort of shared world kind of thing,
Yeah.
where you have sort of an established sort of kernel to the story world, to the setting, and then you go, hey, I want you to make this part of the story world and do something with it, or this character and do something with it, and then here's the rules, here's the constraints, as long as you stay within those constraints, do what you want.
Yeah, because I was thinking too, it's like I could do like a general, like say like with Traveler, but same thing with the post-apocalyptic, is do kind of like a Traveler style zine, but then put in specific things to write up,
Yeah.
whether it be the planets, corporations, NPCs,
Right.
and then over time that all gets developed, and
Right.
and then at the end I've got a setting.
I mean, that's kind of in a way the way I sort of develop my campaigns when I'm really serious about it. Uh, is I start with like the big picture stuff, like what are the most powerful entities, and that might just be, so like say in a Traveler kind of game, or sci-fi, it would be, the Wutani Corp, and that's
Right.
and that'll be all it gets. It's a name of a company on an index card, and I slap it down, and then their competitor, the colonial authorities, or what you put the biggest, the most powerful players, and then you sort of go, okay, well, what are the conflicts between, what does this group want that conflicts with what this group wants, and you can just sort of write, these can be bullet point notes, they don't have to be 10,000 word developed things, because once you sort of understand sort of story structure, and this is where some of these classes where I take help, because you can see how those conflicts work, and then you're setting up the conflict and then getting out of the way and let the gamers
Right.
it out, right?
You start the machine and see what the
Right,
players
and
do with them.
that's where understanding story is really valuable for a game master or a game designer, is because you're setting up a story, but you're not telling the story.
Right.
So then I just sort of, so then as I'm doing my campaign design, I just kind of filter that down. So if you think about an org chart, right? An org chart looks sort of like a pyramid kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to fill in, then you just continue to do with the cards. You just go to go, okay, well, the middle management, the local management, and then the minions at the bottom. Well, you may not necessarily develop all this other stuff, but you decide, well, this is where we're going to start our story or our game, and we're going to focus on this, but we know all this other stuff is out there, and we can go, oh, I had that, as I'm developing the detail on this little place, I can remember, oh yeah, there was that other corporation that has that mining colony that's 3 sectors over, and that ties into this other mining colony that the story is in. So I can do a little vignette where I pull something in from over there and stick it on there to create a little conflict. And then maybe that's the next direction we go, and we don't really develop any more of this
Right.
line. You can go, I think, building a framework that's very rough and ready, that's just enough to give you an overall sort of viewpoint, and then zooming in on the one little spot at the bottom where you're at is how I would recommend doing something like that.
Yeah, I think what probably would be is they would probably be things that are very specific, but then give guidelines on probably how and ways those could be used.
Yep. Well, that's kind of what my project that I'm working on right now is. It's a here's a specific situation that the players walk into. So there's a lord that's a drunk and doesn't he was an adventurer who took over another adventurer's domain. Basically, he had a 9th level lord who created a domain, and then another 9th level lord came in and says, "Pretty nice house you got there. It'd be terrible if something happened to it." And then killed that guy, and then took over. And he's like, "Oh, this being a lord stuff sucks. I like going around killing monsters. I think I'm just going to sit here and get drunk a lot." So he's terrible. He's not a bad guy. He's just a drunk. And then you have the extremely competent and capable Reeve, who is running basically all the agriculture and like keeping the town fed and doing all that stuff.
He's the adult.
He's the adult, and he thinks he should be the boss.
Yeah.
But he has no skill with a sword, and he knows if he tries to take over, he's going to get killed. There's the local misanthropic druid that's part of a cult that wants to completely wipe out human civilization, but because they're such a small little cult, they have to work in the shadows.
Yeah.
There's that guy. There is a spy for a dragon who runs the local inn. And then there's the peasants who are just like, "We're just trying to live, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Help us out." So, and then the way I've set it up is every one of these little factions tries to bring the adventurers into their, like, "Hey, help us out here."
Right.
And sometimes the adventurers are helping everybody. Sometimes they're only helping one group, but that's up to them. So I set all that up and give them sort of how do you do this, and then it's on you.
What's interesting, if you ever play like Blades in the Dark, what they do is they have factions, and generally everything you do at the end, it makes one faction happier with you and one faction less happy with you.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Well, I actually threw together a house ruled reputation system.
Yeah.
Which is what it is. It's basically a modifier to a reaction roll is all it is. It's either +3 is the best and -3 is the worst. So if you like do something that really pisses off these guys, well, you get a -3.
Right.
Do something to help these group out, you have a +3. And it's like it can go up and down, and I just have it on the reference sheet, a little blank where you can like write in what the current reputation modifier is. So it's fairly simple thing to implement in your game without going nuts.
Right.
Creating a whole new subsystem that you have to track and pay attention to.
Right.
And that you can insert pretty much in any OSR game.
Or you could just use smiley stickers or frowny stickers.
Yes. Yeah, you could. You really could. I mean,
You get 2 smileys.
I try to keep my stuff simple.
Yeah, but the other thing too, that I was just thinking too, is you could also do it where, like, maybe for every smiley face you get 1 favor.
Sure. Yep.
Anyway, we're devolving into game design. I think we're probably hitting the time-space continuum, Travis. So it's probably a good spot to stop where we're debating modifications to the reaction table.
Indeed. Well, I hope some of that was informative, helpful, entertaining.
I'm sure there's at least one piece somewhere that somebody will find helpful.
hope so.
Hopefully they put us at 1.5 speed while listening to this.
Doing the laundry or something.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, thanks again, and
You're welcome.
Until next time, Travis.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun. I needed a blah blah blah, and I really like where you were going with some of the stuff you're writing.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know whether I get off on a tangent really easy. I go.
It's okay. It's on the 10. Yeah, the other thing I was going to say is I haven't really watched. I subscribed to your video channel, but I didn't really watch through them. But for whatever reason, I think your first video showed up, like the first one that you made for your video log.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. I'm going to try and do a thing. And I thought, that's pretty raw.
Well, like, I need to do more of those. So that little devlog series is intended to be like that. That's like, I'm documenting, I'm trying to document this sort of process that I'm going through so that hopefully when I get 50 of these videos together, somebody can sit and binge through them and go and see a progression of, well, this is how this started. Oh, it fucking crashed and burned over here, but then you like rose to the ashes and made something out of it or whatever. So that's intended to be just like straight, like not too heavily edited.
Well, when I say raw, I don't really mean that. What I mean is you're expressing self-doubt. You talked about how you sat in front of the camera like for 45 minutes and you're finally just going to do it.
Right.
You know, I think there needs to be more honesty about that sort of stuff. Like,
yeah. And that's part of why I was doing it. It's like, oh, this is not easy to do this. Right. And because, you know, when you see, well, and I think that's helpful for people who actually want to do it. And that's the main reason I was putting it out there, is like, this is something for people who want to do this. They get the reality that, oh, you know, I had to really work hard at this. And a lot of it.
And I'm feeling self-doubt right now. Like if it's successful later on, you go back and start, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't necessarily feel comfortable what I'm doing. I'm going to do this anyway.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what people need to hear. It's like, it's okay. You gotta, everybody, very few people go to things with confidence and knowledge. You just jump into that. You just do that leap of faith, basically. And it's not easy.
Well, you know, a story that really helps me is, and I think of it often, was Alfred Hitchcock had made 60 films or something, and he was making Psycho, and he was one of the most sought after directors, filmmakers in Hollywood. He'd been nominated for an Oscar like 7 times, making money hand over fist, and he's making Psycho. And the whole time he was making it, right up to the day it released in the theaters, he thought, this is going to be the last movie I ever make. This movie is going to ruin me. I'm going to be done. Nobody is ever going to want me to direct another film ever again. Like this, you know, this guy who was the peak of his abilities.
Right.
And he's like, I'm done with this film. People were lined up around the block at every showing at the Chinese theater every day for 2 weeks when the Psycho came out. And it was nuts how big that film was. It was huge.
Yeah, and
he doubted it the whole time.
Stand-up comedians, I've listened to. Used to listen. Well, he obviously is dead now, but of Gilbert Godfrey.
Yeah,
People like him, they're like a
Yeah.
lot of people were scared. Like
Oh
people you
yeah.
think are not a big deal, they're
Yeah.
scared going on.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I think that there is, you can never get rid of it. It's always there. It's maybe you get better at handling it, but the fear of it is always, that doubt is always going to be there. At
Yeah,
least
and
for me.
it's also a lot of people tied with the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
Yep.
like they're gonna figure out I'm just a hack. It's like,
They're gonna go, well, he got lucky with that first one, but
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I think well, a thing that kept a theme, and I wish I would have thought of mentioning it. A theme that did come up, I would probably say the most important thing that came up all weekend was having a community of people that you're doing this with. Is that you can't do this alone.
Well,
And that has always been my thought. I'm going to do this alone.
see, I think the thing is, and you say that, but so you've not been part of so you've not made a zine yet.
I have not.
So the people who make zines, it is, I don't want to, probably a brotherhood is too not right, but there is a certain amount of so much goodwill that is communicated and help that goes on that it's absolutely astounding. So so in a lot of ways, probably, and I think because I'm interviewing people, I get to meet more people, but everybody's just with other people very generous and kind, and
Yeah, I think that's key. I think it really is. And I don't think I appreciated it as much until recently. Like, I'm like, oh no, I need to really be in here. I need to I need to be in here mixing it up a little more than I have been.
yes. Yeah, and I think it depends what you want to do, but yes, yes, yes. And there are there are also some people that are just extremely positive. But yeah, I think you're right. You need to put it out there, and the networking, and that's what's really this podcast has helped me do, because it's not natural for me. It's
Right.
natural for me to talk with somebody about role playing games, but it's not natural for me to just
Right. Well, I think this format helps it because you're not really like doing some sort of like
right.
series of questions. You're just sort of like going where the conversation goes and see what happens.
Yeah, I think I tried early on to be a little bit more because I wasn't sure, but I never was very scripted. But now I don't even know. I have no idea really even what I'm going to say after I say 1, 2, 3. I have no idea. If I start thinking about it, I start to panic.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't even think about it. It's like I'm not even going to think about what I'm going to say after 3. I'm just going to say, hello, whoever, and just wing it from there. And usually, I think all my introductions are not very, they're not very polished, and they're very awkward, but they're less awkward than if I was trying to script it out.
Well, and I think in our space, that's fine.
Yes,
In
exactly.
fact, and in fact, I think it's maybe better
Right.
than being this clean, polished production. I think in certain game circles, being clean, polished, if you're making 5e shit,
Right.
if you're focused on Wizards of the Coast, looking like a professional production would be a lot more important.
Right. And I think the thing is, I'm a dude, just a single person, not a single person. I mean, there's nobody else helping with this.
Right. Right.
And so it's like I work a full-time job. I'm doing this once a week. My time's limited. It's just like it is what it is. I mean, there's a certain amount of professionals I do kind of put into it. There's an intro, and out is usually this and that, but it's like
Right.
everything I can do, all my editing, and uploading for both this and with YouTube in 1 hour. And then
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yep.
And so, but it's right. In my YouTube is where I could improve because it looks terrible.
Yeah, and that's and that unfortunately takes effort.
It does.
It really does, and I've been putting a lot of effort into it and study into it, and there's a lot more to it than. But once you get, I think, I would say the first thing to start with is trying to get thumbnails tied down. It's crazy. The two things I would say: thumbnail, and then maybe go in and find 20 seconds of the video that was like just fire in the conversation. Drop that in the first 20 seconds of the video. So good thumbnail, first 20 seconds of the video, maybe 30 seconds of the video is an excerpt from something farther in.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to you doing an intro for the conversation and then the conversation. I think if you did that, you would be surprised how much of a difference that makes. Because if you, a big YouTube metric is retention. So click-through rate is a big one. And then retention is another big one. And then partially where you get your traffic from, because you can target that, right? You can target what part of the YouTube algorithm you get your traffic from. My target is, what I'm specifically targeting things for is what they call browse functions, which is when you bring up YouTube page and you click on home and it suggests videos.
Yeah.
That's where I want to be. And the way you get there is by making your thumbnails and your titles for people, right? For the people that are going to read it and go, oh, that looks interesting. That sounds interesting. I'm going to watch that. And then they click on it and they'll make a decision about whether they're going to watch more in the first 30 seconds. Your retention rate at 30 seconds is huge. Like, you need to try to be pushing, because if they look at it in the first 30 seconds and they're like, nah, that doesn't sound good, on to the next thing. So those are the three things that I'm personally looking at: click-through rate, where my stuff is coming from, because you can also try to rank for search by doing keyword search. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Some of them free, some of them cost money. So you can try to rank for keywords. Like my website, I actually did some picking. I on some of my blog posts, people who actually know how SEO works for Google would be able to look at my blog posts and notice certain things. Like, I will use certain words every so often, like every 100 words, I make sure that same word is in there, and that word is at least 10 times in the blog post, and it's in the title, and it's in headers. Like if I'm going to use the words Dungeons and Dragons, I use Dungeons and Dragons, but then I will also use D&D in there, because those are search terms that actually get used. Right. So I'll mix in the search terms. So you can do the same thing in YouTube too, where you can, like, you'll see the YouTube, you'll see some of these YouTube titles, like, if I was going to start a YouTube channel in 2022, will be a title.
Yeah.
Or what are the best role-playing games of 2022, right? Well, somebody will search. That's because somebody did some keyword research.
Oh yeah.
And said and the keyword research pulled up, well, people want to know what the new RPGs are and coming out this year, or the best. They'll like try to key, and then YouTube is the second largest search engine on the internet. So if I do keyword searches, or if I use some of the keyword tools, it'll tell you well, there's a lot of people searching for this, but there's not a lot of results competition, right? There's
Right.
not a lot of there's a lot of people searching for it, but there's not a lot of video competition for it. So I can do a video about that. And if I write my title properly, the YouTube algorithm will pop that up to the top search engine result page on on their YouTube search.
That makes sense.
Do that. So there's ways that you can sort of game the algorithm a little bit. But because my long-term goal is to get people back to my website and sign on to my newsletter, I'm always focusing on providing value content to the viewer, right? I'm like, well, what does that person, what are their problems? How can I solve that problem for them, and how can I do it in a way that's uniquely me? And then they'll watch my videos and go, oh, wow, I wonder what else that guy has. There's a link down here. Click. Oh, he's got a newsletter. Click.
Right.
And then I'll get my people, and I'll filter the ones that are really into my stuff to my newsletter. And then those are the people that I'm going to eventually sell to hardest. That's where I can go, okay, I've got 2,000 people on my newsletter list at some point, and I go, well, I know that my newsletter list converts 50% every time. So then I can start making decisions about how I spend my money when I'm doing a project. And go, well, I know that I can pull $5,000 out of my newsletter list without a doubt, right? I feel very confident. So if I know I'm going to get $5,000 out of them, then I can start setting budgets and sort of expectations and that sort of stuff based on engaged audience.
Well, you've definitely thought things through more than I do. I'm just a reactionary.
Well, that's actually a problem, because I think things through too much, and then they take me way too long, and then they finally. Now, I'm getting to the point where I can now do that I'm doing and not thinking. I'm just like, okay, I figured this out. I have a strategy. It's working. Now it's just freaking in it.
Right. Yeah, and I think this a lot of stuff you mentioned is right, and maybe something I'll look at when I'm out of the. I think once I get through October, November, because I got another Kickstarter coming up.
Yep.
And
I thought the Kickstarter did really well.
It did really well. I'm still not. It looks like it's kind of done for you, but for me, I'm still dealing with.
Oh, I'm sure the back end of that production is.
Yeah, so I'm really dealing with the backer. I've been dealing with POD issues, print on demand issues that are just. I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff, and I've been swinging out back and forth on a lot of things. So, but yeah, it did very well. Well, basically, and I'm gonna it 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 did well enough that I feel confident that I can pay everybody. I believe. I'm still a little nervous about pay everybody 10 cents a word. I believe.
Wow.
I believe, and be sustainable. And I think eventually, if it's, who knows what's going to happen in the second issue,
Right.
I don't know, but I think it is very possible. I'm assuming it's going to do better. And I think there's going to be a point where it may level off, but I think there's a point where I can pay everybody 10 cents a word. And I think I can pay for full cover the art, I pay for all the editing, and still make okay money.
That's good.
And I think the reason I want to pay people well for a number of reasons, but also I don't want to do much writing, and I want to get good writers, and I want to maybe be doing this like 4 times a year.
Right. Well, and it's hard to write and do the production work.
Yeah, and I'm better off. So the other thing I found with backer kit is, well, here's what I found with add-ons. Those add-ons are lucrative is not the right word, but there's a fair amount of money to be made with the add-ons.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the Scoundrels PDF, $3 a PDF. I think, I can't remember now, but I think I sold 100 of them
Wow.
from a Kickstarter from a long time ago.
Right.
Well, last year. I didn't know
Right.
there's any interest. And so, you start looking at that kind of stuff. It's like, okay,
Who
you
was the
know,
one that the was it the guy down in Cincinnati? You interviewed him who had like the crazy like um letter offset
oh
printing.
yeah, Travis Stamper.
Yeah, so I signed up for his most recent one um that he did, and I don't know why it's my blanking on the
And
name
I'm
of
blanking
it.
on it too, but it's
That
the
DCC zine that he does.
yeah, it's
But
the
he had all
Tales of
those
the
other,
Smoking
right.
Worm.
Yeah, and he had all the other zines with it that you could do as add-ons. Same thing with Ben Lawrence on
Yeah.
the Old Tan's Door.
So
Um
so the thing is even if you don't make a lot initially, there is the potential to have continual earnings with that.
yes. Yeah, there's this phrase that there's no such thing as passive income. Well, there are authors still making money from their books who are dead.
Yeah.
That's pretty passive. Dead is
Yeah.
dead is very passive.
Well, the problem is you got to do it. So what I've realized. So Scoundrels, of course, I didn't really push it, but some of the stuff I put on drive through is not a great way to make money.
Really.
It is not.
I suspected that. I you're the first person who confirmed my suspicion.
It you can put stuff. I think if you're constantly putting stuff out, I think you can do okay. But nothing generates attention like a Kickstarter.
See, I've been resistant to doing a Kickstarter. Maybe I need to change my tone about that.
So what do you want to kickstart?
I don't know if I want to kickstart this project. I think maybe the next one
Yeah, I
I
would.
might.
What you could do is just do something small, and then your stress levels are a lot less. But make sure whatever you do is completed
Yeah.
before
Well,
you.
the thing I have, it's gonna be completely finished before. I mean, it's not. In fact, I just finished the write up for the cover art today. Um, no, it's going to be completely written, completely done because I was just going to sell it POD, um, probably through Lulu.
I would definitely Kickstarter. There's no reason not to Kickstarter in my mind.
Okay.
Well, why say that? I I started with Scoundrels, and I was nobody. Like I am I mean, like I just put this thing on. Like there's no reason for anybody to buy this from me. Nobody knows who I am,
Right.
and it did well.
Huh.
I mean, it wasn't like crazy. I think I think it. In the end, I might have made like $500 or $600 at the end.
So
I mean,
did you do a print run of it or
I did.
and
It
ship
did.
it?
I did. It did some dumb things, but yeah, I did a print run with it. I did There were three separate zines, but they were combined together, and it. But the point is it it it's it's not tied to any system. It's system neutral. I mean, it's sci-fi. I mean, there's a whole list of things I could say why it shouldn't have done, but it did fine.
Huh.
And so no, there is that Kickstarter is the Kickstarter itself is a marketing machine, and without which it is well worth it. Well worth it.
Okay. That that kind of that that definitely gives me something to think about then.
Even if you just wanted to do a very small item, and not charge much for it. Because once you sell to those people, then the next time you put something up, Kickstarter notifies those people
Oh yeah.
and all their friends.
Yep. Yeah, a friend of my a guy that plays in my game group, he's a sculptor, and he made these
Oh,
on
neat.
Kickstarter.
Yeah.
He's a really good sculptor. He does some amazing stuff, but he does Kickstarters, I don't know, every one a year, usually one every other year. And he's said similar things. He's like, yeah, I have a certain group of people that just always on Kickstarter that I put a Kickstarter out and they just like they show up.
Yeah, I mean, some people, it's going to be based on what you do. So if you put something out for OSC, you're going to create some OSC. But I think you
Right.
also get people that they're if they buy more, there's some things that are you, and they want things that are from you. I mean,
Right.
not that there's anything special, but you bring something unique to whatever it is that you do that nobody else can do.
Right.
And that's where I think the appeal is for Kickstarter. It's the stuff I do is there's a Jeff Jonesness about it. I
Yep.
don't know what that means, good or bad, but it is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's a little different.
And so but my goodness, it's yeah, and you get a lot of statistics while this whole thing's going on.
Oh,
In
that's
a lot of
useful too.
information. Yeah, it's no, it's I highly recommend it. What I would do if I were you, and just do it, I'd just do something small, keep the price point fairly low, keep your risk pretty low, and just use it as a first one just to experiment with.
Huh. Okay. Well, that is good to know.
I think, I don't know. What I would like to do is I would like to retire from my current job in 2 years. And what I'm trying to do is I would like to make about, if I can, my goal is to make at least between $20,000 and $30,000 a year publishing.
Yep. Well, and I think I think a thing that I'm going to do that I see a lot of other people not doing is just publishing. Right? Think I think that's doable. I think that's a possible thing that you can absolutely do for sure. Especially once you retire and you have time to do things like make better videos or more targeted videos.
Well, actually,
And focusing more on your marketing kind of
well, the
stuff.
thing is, if I can if OSC remains strong, which I don't doubt it will, I can put 4 of those out. I need to get new people, and I can't improve videos, but if I can get, say, Traveler going,
Yeah.
and that is maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and then if
Right.
I get a post-apocalyptic one going maybe
Yeah.
twice a year, and they all make about $5,000,
Yeah.
$4,000 or $5,000, it's like, and the thing is like what I'm doing with, so what happens with Gary's appendix is, I think what's going to happen is eventually that the bestiary is going to be written, and then I'm going to publish a bestiary,
Right.
and so
Yep.
that will be another thing,
Right.
that should be evergreen.
Yep. Absolutely. That's what you really want, is you want stuff that continues to be a backlist generator of revenue.
And then what I'll probably do is, once I get so many issues of I've been thinking about this, so many issues of the zine, then I'll strip out the bestiary and then just do all the articles for like issues 1 through 5.
Right.
So that way I'm not having a zillion individual booklets
Right.
that people have to do.
Right.
And then I'll strip that out, and then pretty soon it will just be and I just, like I said, I'll do the bestiary, and I'm planning doing some similar things with some of the other stuff. The post-apocalyptic one, doing the bestiary as well with that eventually.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be good.
So the thing is,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
definitely a way to do that, is to create content and then resell it
yes, 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 yes.
further down the line to new people. Because like that's the thing. Because there's some college kid right now who's never heard of OSE.
Yeah.
But in 4 years after he graduates college and he gets into some town and he starts playing, he gets into some game group and they're playing OSE, and then they go, oh yeah, this Jeff Jones guy, he's got this cool zine. He's 6 issues in. You really like it. And then that guy comes back and buys the first 6 issues,
Yeah.
or the compiled volume 1 of Gary's appendix, issues 1 through 5 or whatever. It's like I have the first 46 issues of a comic book called Monstrous, but the first 29 of them I have are in a big freaking
Yeah.
collection of them, because I didn't know about the book until it was 26 issues in. It's like, oh, this is really cool. What is this? Oh, this is great. What is it about? I don't know. Well, I can go get this compiled chunk
Right.
and hunkin' thing all in one book and read through it.
Right. Because you would, I mean, for comics, people would want to, but for the zine, it's the problem is like inventory. I don't want to. That's the other thing I'm thinking about. It's like you need inventory to sell, but there's a point where you don't want too much inventory. And
Right.
then you have like all sorts of odd numbers of issues 1 through 8. Like,
Right.
I don't want that either.
Yeah, you end up being like Lee Gold with boxes of shit in your garage for 30 years.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to avoid. So there's an inventory. So between print on demand and Mixam and other things, I'm trying to navigate that space. So it's there. I think we're both into this for there's a mental aspect to what you and I are doing. By mental, I mean there's it's like with Traveler and a lot of there's games within games.
Yes. Right.
So even within public, like with the YouTube, there's a game within the game. Like,
yes. Yeah.
there's always that's where
Yeah.
well,
Louis Pulsiford talks about his favorite game is the game of designing games.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. Well, I probably let you go.
Yep. Yep.
And you have a good night, mister.
Thank you. You too.
And
Anytime.
I'll be dropping this in 2 weeks.
Okay. Very good. I will spread it about.
All righty. And if you want any audio or videos, let me know.
Yeah. If you could, that would be great whenever you get it.
What do you want, the audio, video, or both?
If you have them if they're separate files, then go ahead and send me both. If it's just a video, that really just the video with the audio.
Yeah, so I got a video. So I have a video with the audio, just audio, and separate audios.
Video with the audio is fine, because all I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw it in my video editor and chop up a 30-second bit and throw it into Instagram Reels. And
what I'll do is when I get ready to edit it, I will drop it into Dropbox and send you a link.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's absolutely perfect.
All right. Very good. Thanks, Travis.
You're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate it.